This video was sponsored by Fabletics. More from them in a bit. What is the biggest flop in video game history? I mean, the first answer that comes to mind is like what? E.T. for the Atari 2600? A game that was so bad that millions of unsold copies were apparently buried in the desert. Led to the collapse of the entire video game industry. Okay, part of that's true. Part of that is not entirely true. But either way, no, E.T. is not the biggest flop in gaming history. For one, the game actually sold kinda well. I mean, it didn't sell as well as Atari expected, but it sold over 1 million units. And also, it didn't cost that much to make. In the early days of video games, the average cost to develop a game like this was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then the rest would go into marketing. Nowadays, it's pretty common for a lot of games to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they still gotta pay for marketing. Since we don't normally get exact budgets and sales numbers for a lot of games, we gotta do some guesswork. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to look at the concurrent player count on Steam. How many people are playing at the same time? Yes, I know most people who are playing video games probably aren't just on Steam, but it's the only metric we have and we can kind of extrapolate from there. The biggest games will have a few 100,000 players playing all at once. Some will even manage to break into the millions. Of course, it's extremely embarrassing when a game like Suicide Kill the Justice League, a AAA massive live service by WB, only managed to have a peak player count of 13,000 players. This game probably cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, and for a live service, this meant it was basically dead on arrival. But even single player games can flop. Forspoken, remember that? Yeah, that had a peak of 12,579 players. For context, the 5-year-old indie game Risk of Rain 2 has almost 40,000 players as of the time I'm writing this. Skull and Bones, Ubisoft's infamous quadruple A pirate adventure, reportedly couldn't even sell 1 million units. It sold way less copies than Hot Wheels Unleashed, which did not cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And at least so far, these 3 games have been easily the top contenders for the biggest flops of all time in terms of money spent and money earned. Except for maybe Babylon's Fall, but nobody talks about that. But this all changed with Concord. When I want to ride a bike or row a boat, or imagine I'm rowing a real boat, I find the easiest way to avoid public indecency charges is to wear clothes. This is why I'm glad Fabletics sent me some of their stuff. High quality, lightweight activewear that looks good and feels great. One of my big problems with going golfing or leaving my house is that general etiquette dictates that you look presentable, and my wardrobe generally consists of things that border on tasteless. But with Fabletics, I don't have to worry about that. Fabletics has a large collection of clothing, from t-shirts to jackets to pants to shorts to pants to jackets to t-shirts to hats and everything in between. For me, it's perfect. I like all-purpose clothing. I like stuff that looks good in any situation, is functional, and most importantly, comfortable. I like comfortable clothes. So with Fabletics, you could sign up for this VIP program, which gives you genuinely incredible deals on this high quality clothing. If you want to sign up with the service, but you don't want to pay every single month, you can skip months. But if you don't, you get a credit towards any 2-piece outfit or any product up to $100 every month. Now, there are other perks as well, and I recommend you check all this out. So go to fabletics.com/knowledgehusk to get 80% off site-wide when signing up to be a VIP member. Link is in the description. So this game was developed by ex-Bungie staff. It had a lot of hype surrounding it because of that fact a few years ago. Couple this with the fact that it was a PlayStation Studios game, and people expected this would be the next big thing. But that hype died away the moment the first trailer dropped. It looked like another generic hero shooter, you know, a game where players select from a cast of characters with unique powers and work as a team to complete objectives. Another Overwatch clone in 2024. Not only that, the game looked like an obvious Guardians of the Galaxy knockoff. It was clearly inspired by the films, which is just weird because it's like, it's not Guardians of the Galaxy. And of course there was other problems, but I'll have to get to that in a bit. Now, honestly, most people did expect Concord to be a flop. I think everybody, with the exception of maybe a few journalists, knew this was This was going down. But nobody knew how bad it could do. I mean, after all, the main competition, Overwatch 2, isn't really doing that great at the moment. Valve is developing its own hero shooter, but that's not publicly available right now. And Marvel Rivals, yet another hero shooter, is set to arrive in December. So it's not out yet. So this game did have competition, but not really. Now this game was $40 and those other titles are free, but Sony just released a live service for $40 that turned out pretty well for them. This game also bypassed the microtransactions and battle passes up front, just offering a complete package, which is something a lot of people said they wanted. But even still, this game is almost definitely the biggest flop in gaming history. We don't know the exact budget. It could be 50 million, 100 million, 150, or even 200 or more. We don't know, but we know it cost a lot of money. Sony had huge expectations for this project. It took 8 years to develop. They already approached Amazon's gaming anthology TV series, Secret Level, to make a Concord episode. The only other franchise that has a dedicated episode by PlayStation is God of War. This was supposed to be a big deal. Less people are playing Concord on Steam than the number of developers who made the game. Now, to be fair, on PlayStation, where the game is plastered all over that storefront page, there is definitely more players, but probably not too many. This was not in the top 10 games sold for the week, or the top 20, or the top 30. And for a new game, for a AAA game, for a AAA live service console exclusive game, this is dead on arrival. I would be astonished if it's still around this time next year. And it's difficult to convey how big of a disaster this was. This is the kind of game that will live in the history books, something that the executives will study relentlessly to figure out what went wrong. So, what went wrong? So I bought the game, wanted to see what's the big deal, and honestly, there is a time trial mode in the game where you go around and shoot targets and dodge obstacles and stuff, and I did terrible in my extremely unoptimized run, and I'm still in the top 20 players in the world. That's how few people are playing this game.
Come on, let's...
So why did it fail? I guess first of all, we could talk about the pricing. The game cost $40. That is a barrier of entry that the other competitors don't have. The competitors that are free to play. It just doesn't look very unique, looks kind of generic. People are not gonna pay $40 for something that looks like a Guardians of the Galaxy knockoff when the competitors are again free. But number three, the third thing, the most important thing, is the culture war. That's it. Go and mask off, knowledge husk exposed. So if you don't know, the culture war started back in the 2010s when the hipsters had a great schism amongst themselves. Half of them were really into Sleater-Kinney and frappes, and the other half was into electro swing and hand-brewed coffee. They started fighting and it kind of just went off the rails from there. Most people don't know anything about Concord except for two things. They know that it has these character designs, and that the robot has pronouns in its bio. This got the game memed into oblivion. From the moment it was revealed, it was doomed to be labeled as peak cringe by the internet, by the target demographic. Yes, if it was a free game, it would have more players. Yes, if it was a single player game, it would have more players. If it wasn't a hero shooter or wasn't so generic, it would have more players. But the problem here is not that the game didn't have enough players, it's that it didn't have any players. This is a disaster, unlike anything the gaming industry has seen before. And you just gotta ask yourself, what makes this game different than so many others? A lot of it's the character designs. It is. If Concord had the same character designs as the first Descendants, if each hero looked like this, do you think that the game would have sold more or less copies? And of course, I can't ignore the monkey in the room. Black Myth Wukong, a game from a Chinese studio based on Journey to the West, managed to sell 10 million copies in 3 days this week. Yes, many of these sales are going to be from the game's home country, but a lot are still from Americas, into Europes, and whatever other places are out there. It is by far the top-selling game on PlayStation right now, as opposed to the game that was made by PlayStation that nobody's playing. So why are so many people interested in playing this random Chinese action game as opposed to Concord? Well, I mean, Black Myth Wukong looks fun, but like not 10 million copies in 3 days fun. That is pretty much unparalleled numbers except for the biggest releases in gaming history. This game is getting absurd concurrent numbers on Steam. And I think the reason for this is, again, the culture war. We're seeing a reverse boycott. So remember how the media covered GTA in the early 2000s? Every news outlet was saying how bad Grand Theft Auto was for the moral health of our society, how the games were degenerate and evil and bad and so on and so forth. Now what did this do? This gave GTA more publicity. Gamers heard that this GTA was problematic, it was a forbidden fruit, and it got them curious. And now, decades later, GTA is as big as any game can get. Not because it's still that forbidden fruit, it's really not, but it got the ball rolling. The same thing happened with Black Myth Wukong. Game journalists have had a bone to pick with this game for a while, for reasons that I'm not really gonna... But long story short, they kept saying, don't play this game. Don't play this game. And just like GTA, it got people curious. People started to ask, why shouldn't I play this game? Is it really that problematic? On the other hand, Concord was seen as the safe, friendly, broad, marketable, 4-quadrant style release. Corporate slop cringe. You get to this point where there are two completely unrelated games and unrelated genres that are getting compared because one represents the establishment and the other represents the thing that the game journalists don't want you to know about. Did every single person who bought Monkey Game buy it simply because an article on IGN made them angry? No, probably not, but it got people talking. They bought the game, they told their friends, and just like GTA, it only got bigger from there. As for Concord, people just saw clips of it online. They saw the memes and they thought, wow, this looks bad. I'm not gonna buy that. I'm not gonna play that. And if you want one short, quick, concise answer to why Concord failed, that is it. This is it. But if you want a longer one, I can provide that as well. Okay, so do you know how long it took Naughty Dog to make the original Uncharted? It took 2 years. Started development in 2005, released in 2007. Concord took 8 years to make. This is astonishing. This is baffling. I mean, I've played the game. It feels polished. I believe that a lot of work went into this, but 8 years is wild. A lot can change in 8 years. That's a long time in terms of culture. Imagine if the original Uncharted took 8 years to make. That would have meant that it started development in 1999. The gaming industry changed a whole lot in these 8 years. The top grossing game that released in 1999 was not some action game or some FPS. It was Donkey Kong 64, and the original Pokemon games were still topping all the sales charts. GameSpot's Game of the Year was Soul Calibur. If Naughty Dog did start developing Uncharted in 1999, they would have no idea what the gaming landscape, what culture would even look like by the year 2007. Naughty Dog was releasing games like Crash Team Racing around this time. So yeah, a lot can happen in 8 years. So now in 2024, we got to go back 8 years ago and see when Concord began development, what was going through their heads. And oh, it's 2016. The big game was Overwatch, the original Overwatch, a game that was not initially free to play. This is why it makes sense that Concord isn't free to play. That standard didn't exist when this game began development. Guardians of the Galaxy was one of the most popular IPs. The idea of big team-ups and wacky characters was ingrained in culture. Live services were still a novel and interesting idea on game consoles. They were golden gooses that kept laying golden eggs, the gift that keeps on giving. And also there was a lot of culture war stuff going on in 2016. Remember Ghostbusters 2016? It felt like a new American Civil War was gonna break out over discourse of this film. Maybe this is what the developers imagined people would want 8 years from then. Maybe these decisions were made later, but clearly, this long development cycle did not do this game any favors. And what does it have to show for it? The visuals, the graphics? I mean, yeah, it looks impressive. A lot of work went into motion capture, but that also meant that they couldn't change the character designs after the massive backlash. All of those fancy textures and particle effects and animations and graphics did literally nothing to save this game from being the biggest flop of all time. If you need proof that good graphics alone don't result in good sales figures, this is it. This right here. But also, this shows that you can't just have good gameplay either, because the gameplay isn't that bad. There's so many other external factors that contributed to this game's failure. Look, this game is too bloated. There's way too many cooks in this kitchen, all trying to check off boxes of what they imagined would result in the largest number of possible sales. They wanted to appeal to everybody, and by doing that, they appealed to nobody. I think it's horrifying to think about what Sony could have spent their time and money on instead of Concord. Like, for one, they could have not shut down Japan Studio. A new Twisted Metal. Honestly, I would have taken PlayStation Home 2 over this. Companies will analyze this failure for years to come because it did everything wrong. And that's unique. This is a unique way to fail. But I imagine Sony already knows this. See, for a while, Sony has been trying to push for more live service games from its biggest franchises. Last of Us Online, Horizon Online. And Bungie, who they acquired a few years ago, was supposed to be in charge of managing all of this. But it turns out the situation at Bungie, it was just a complete mess. Financially, management-wise, stuff was bad. Stuff is really bad. A lot of projects from PlayStation Studios got canceled, a lot of live services, a lot of Bungie staff got laid off, and Bungie was basically restructured. At the time, I thought this was pretty drastic. I mean, Sony had spent a lot of money on Bungie, and looking back, maybe this was, in part, due to Concord. Like, Sony would have had the pre-order numbers on this game, and like, it would have been in the single or double digits for Steam. You know, it would have been bad. This is astonishing to me. I've never seen a game fail this badly in terms of, you know, just money. This game was such a catastrophe. It probably changed how Sony views live service games. You should have just made a new Killzone, Sony. Should have made a new Killzone. Probably not with these character designs, though. I don't think that would go over very well. Again, huge thanks to Fabletics for sponsoring this video. Go to fabletics.com/knowledgehusk to get 80% off site-wide when signing up to be a VIP member. Link is in the description.